Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for registering and joining this webinar today. My name is John Bettenberg. I'm with North American Systems. We're very excited about the recent news of SolidFire joining the NetApp marketing team and being part of NetApp. We've been SolidFire resellers for almost a year now, but we've been longtime NetApp resellers, and we think SolidFire is a perfect fit at NetApp. As a side note, we're hosting our 10th annual Nasi Twins event at Target Field on May 10th. SolidFire is one of our supporters and sponsors for that event, and you're all invited to attend. There's going to be 5 feature products presented that day, but let us know if you're interested, and we'll make sure to send you tickets in the mail. As an introduction to North American Systems, I'll be brief in the next couple slides, and then I'd like to turn it over to Jesse Jensen, the SolidFire SE, who will present. Our corporate headquarters is in Eagan, Minnesota, in the Great Water Business Park, soon to be right across the street from the new Vikings Training Center. We've got a list of different products and partners that we support and sell. Of course, Oracle, Dell, VMware, Veeam, Fujitsu. NetApp and SolidFire, as we're here today to discuss. We're very impressed with SolidFire's comprehensive data protection strategy. SolidFire enables an integrated cloud protection solution that includes massive scalability and guaranteed performance for virtualized environments and cloud environments. So we're very interested to talk to you further about that. We also sell IBM, HP, Quantum, Zerto. Terex is our global support partner for global third-party support products. Sophos is a software security partner. Cisco and SimpliVity are a few of the other partners that we represent. So our Nasi Solutions team is very focused. It's a specialized team focused on data protection solutions and for virtualized environments. We have certified technicians that become certified at the various levels of the different products that we represent. We offer after-hours data center services for implementation, and part of that includes on-site assessment for environments that have different compliance, regulatory compliance things that need to be met, or any changes in that regard. We do offer software demos in our interoperability lab, typically with the VM replications and cloud DR solutions. These are things that we can do private WebExes for and help to introduce that type of technology. The SolidFire consolidated flash storage solution is what we're here to talk about today. We're very excited about this technology. Not only does it enable your cloud environment, but for block level SAN, this product basically enables you to use all of the nice features that are part of today's SANs in terms of data protection, data replication, snapshots, off-site remote replication, that type of thing. Really covers everything in a scale-out solution as a node technology, and we're very excited about showing this today. We also specialize on disaster recovery, cloud survival, and compliance services. As I mentioned, we do assessments for things like data protection and business continuity assessments as well. So why North American Systems? Essentially, we optimize IT across a range of enabling technologies. We offer unbiased consultation with multiple solutions to choose from. We can be your single point of contact for server virtualization and hyperconverged solutions. and we offer flash storage solutions, primarily SolidFire with NetApp. We also work with companies with network and system multi-vendor support maintenance contracts. This type of management often entails taking lists of different products, both hardware and network, server hardware and network type solutions, and putting them under one managed contract with one renewable expiration date. We focus on converged and hyper-converged solutions for mid and large enterprise environments. We offer in-depth market knowledge of data protection products. We often work with our customers helping to redesign virtual backup environments and DR strategies with some of the most current technology, including SolidFire. And again, we have a 15-year relationship with a global third-party maintenance provider. And again, that can include multi-vendor lists of products that some of our largest customers that we work with have extremely large lists of maintenance contracts that we work with on that. So I wanted to make sure that people understood that that's a service that we provide as well. With that, I'll turn this over to our presenter, Jesse Jensen. He's a SolidFire SE, and we work very closely with him on customer visits. In the Twin City metro area, we'd be happy to schedule appointments to come on site and with Jesse and to talk about your environments. So with that, Jesse, I think we can tee up the SolidFire portion of the presentation.
Sounds great. Thank you, John. We really appreciate North American Systems partnering with us to do this webinar about the future of flash storage. So on the call, you probably heard about the NetApp acquisition of SolidFire back in February, and I think it's going to take us to some very interesting places, accelerating our engineering roadmap. So if you want a deeper dive into what that means for SolidFire, reach out to your Nasi representative, and we'll make sure to come on site and let you know. So here we're talking about the all-flash array for the next generation data center. And just as an introduction, my name is Jesse Jensen, SolidFire Systems Engineer in Eagan, Minnesota. And I spent most of my career, 14 years, as a systems administrator for a publishing company in Minnesota, where I worked on VMware, storage, compute, networking. And then about 5 years ago, I jumped the fence into an SE role at VCE, where I talked about vBlocks and EMC storage, and mostly focused on high-end storage like VMAX and Extreme IO. And kept running into SolidFire year after year, and finally decided after digging into the architecture that it was a company I really wanted to come work for. So last July, I made the jump over to SolidFire and haven't looked back since. It's been a fun ride. So what is the next generation data center? It really is a lot of different things from how you think about the data center today. It's agile, it's scalable, it's automated, it's guaranteed. And it is being driven by this transformation of IT that we're seeing that Gartner and IDC are talking about. And really Flash is an enabler for the next generation data center. So Flash in and of itself is great. It's really fast. It fixes a lot of problems, but Flash on its own doesn't fix all of the problems that we experience in the data center. Without the ability to control and have the ability to scale very large, performance is really just a Band-Aid for specific problems, not across the whole data center. And SolidFire is really, we think, the only all-flash array that can scale to large data center needs. And as I think about the history of my data center when I was an admin, we had a few applications. 10 years ago, we had a few applications, and in those applications, there were only a couple that demanded really high performance. And then toward the end of my career in IT, I saw an explosion of applications in the data center where we went from a handful, maybe 10 to 30, 40, 50, and when I left we were upwards of 90 different applications running in the data center, which caused a lot of different challenges with the infrastructure we were trying to run. And so this kind of talks about the history of Flash and how people have tried to deploy Flash for those workloads. The first generation was PCI Flash, where you put a card in a server and you accelerate the performance of that one workload, but it's not mobile and it's typically pretty expensive. The second generation of Flash is the traditional all-flash arrays, where you can have a small amount of scale and you can give a certain workload a great performance, but it still is a fairly costly way to deploy Flash in the data center. With SolidFire's model of being able to flexibly scale out, we can apply Flash across the entire data center and most of the applications in the data center while isolating the performance characteristics of those applications from each other. And you'll notice that there's some things that today, you may not put on Flash on the left-hand side of the screen. Cheap and deep object video streaming, archives, backups, things like that may not be candidates for Flash today. But as Flash grows in size in the future, those are things people will probably also start looking at Flash for. So there's 5 key elements to all Flash in SolidFire's portfolio. So these are the 5: scale out, data assurance, guaranteed performance, automation, and global efficiencies. And I think one of the most interesting things about what we do is when you take scale out and you combine that with global efficiencies, we can do some very powerful things because of how large we can scale. So we'll talk about that in more detail throughout the slide, but we scale much larger than most other all-flash arrays in the industry, which means your global efficiencies at large scale are going to be better than what other people can provide. So kind of drilling into that, our architecture, we start at 4 nodes. This shows each node is a single 1RU server with 10 SSDs in it, and you start with 4 of those. And then from there, you can flexibly scale out from 4 up to 100 nodes in a single cluster today. And that's purely a logical limitation, 100 nodes, which means you can start at about 4 terabyte with no efficiency, and you can grow up to about 3.4 petabyte in a single cluster, factoring in a small amount of efficiency. And performance-wise, you can start at about 200,000 IOPS, and you can grow up to 7.5 million IOPS. But the key word there is controllable in a single cluster. So you can combine all your applications together, and you can control the I/O that those applications get so they don't overrun each other. They don't become bully applications. Very simple pricing model, all-inclusive. A pricing model, which is another key to the next generation data center, is the legacy way of giving you 5 products to do something, and those 5 products have different licensing models. That's not the way people want to grow their data center. Direct Tier 3 support for every customer. Industry standard hardware, 10 gig iSCSI is our backplane. We also have a 16 gig and 8 gig fiber channel. Backwards compatible to 4 gig if you need it. And then really one of the keys to what we do is quality of service. And we'll talk about how that is just a key driver to the next gen data center, and specifically on Flash. Like we talked about, if you have speed but you don't have control, it tends to not fix problems that you want to fix. So who is SolidFire? You may have only heard about us recently, but we've been in the market for a very long time. Founded in 2010, product in the field since 2012. Globally, there's over 2,500 nodes shipped, fueling well over 60,000 businesses today, and acquired in January by NetApp. But the key tenets to what we do, like we talked about, are scale out, self-healing, high availability, which is, again, automation and self-healing is not found in traditional storage platforms, and that's a key to Flash in the next gen data center. Guaranteed quality of service, automation, inline data reduction are all absolute keys. And you'll see that SolidFire is a software-defined storage product that runs on predefined commodity hardware. So here we see we're the 3rd generation of hardware, 8th generation of software. We really have focused on building the intelligence into the application layer and not into the hardware layer, which is incredibly powerful. And I think you'll see as we go through today's presentation how powerful that is. And validated independently by Gartner for the 2 years that they have run their critical capabilities report, 2014 and 2015, that SolidFire really has the capabilities that you need to run data center at large scale on Flash. So how do we do that? Traditionally, people tend to silo applications that cause performance problems onto their own infrastructure. So you may run a large set of your applications on one storage frame, but then when it comes to databases or VDI, you might silo those off onto other types of storage to prevent them from overrunning or impacting the rest of your environment. SolidFire's model is really getting rid of those silos and being able to run all of your applications in a single storage infrastructure with guaranteed performance, preventing them from impacting each other. And the way we do that is through quality of service. So while we are an all-Flash platform, Flash is really, hopefully, the least interesting thing that you see about us today. Flash is an enabler for us to do guaranteed quality of service, where we can guarantee performance to every application or volume, allowing you to respond to demands faster and troubleshoot faster than ever before, while running many different workloads on the same all-Flash cluster at large scale. So the building blocks behind SolidFire are those 1RU commodity servers that we talked about before, and today we have 4 different model types. And as you look at this, kind of think of it as a low performance to high performance, high capacity. So you'll notice these 3 models have 50,000 IOPS for each, but then a varying amount of capacity for each node type. And the last one has a little bit more performance, 75,000 IOPS per node. So again, you start with 4 of any of these node types, and then you can grow your cluster from there, usually in single nodes. Showing an example of that, you start with 4 nodes, and like we talked about, each node gives you 50,000 IOPS. So in this example, your starter cluster of 4 nodes has 200,000 IOPS, and you can grow that in singles. You can add a node in, and you can scale linearly or non-linearly. So if you need a performance node, you can add a performance node. If you need a very large capacity node, you can add a capacity node into your cluster. And most of the time you can do this in singles. If you go from a very small node to a very, very large node, you might have to add 2 at a time, but most of the time you can add singles. And so you can keep growing your environment linearly or non-linearly. And another really cool thing that I love about our architecture is that you can actually scale in or contract your environment without disruption. So you can remove nodes from your cluster very, very easily to move them around in your data center. And where I came from, that was very, very hard to do. To take storage out of an active array was so hard, and it cost so much in professional services that we just never did it. So those types of things, that kind of capability to contract your cluster without disruption, is another key to the next generation data center and having an automated all-flash storage array. Another big deal is flexibility in how you scale. So SolidFire has a FlashForward program where we offer a platform compatibility guarantee, where we guarantee that as long as you're under maintenance, all of our future node types will continue to interoperate, and you can add them into your existing cluster. So you'll never be at a point where you have to throw away hardware in order to upgrade to the next controller or upgrade to the next all-flash device, you'll be able to add the newest, biggest nodes into your cluster as long as you're under maintenance for the future. And then unlimited drive wear guarantee, where under all of our support levels, we guarantee that we will replace a drive if it ever wears out. The big important thing here is that we use commodity grade MLC disk, including TLC flash. We've been using that for about 2 years, where other people have not, or are just now recently adding it into their platform. And the importance there is that that's the cheapest flash on the market, and it enables us to integrate the cheapest flash because we are an extremely flash-friendly write architecture. So we'll talk about that a little bit more later. But even if the drive ever does wear out, it will replace it under our FlashForward program. So our scale-out agility, focusing on how you start with 4 nodes of a specific type, you add capacity over time, and you decide that you're adding more capacity than performance, and so you want to add in some of these capacity nodes, the 9605s. Then you decide that you have another data center where you might want to leverage some of these 4805s, and you don't need the performance in your primary data center. So again, you can simply go into the user interface, you can click dismiss on one of those 4805 nodes, and it rebalances the data across the entire cluster, and then you can unrack that node, and that entire process takes about 43 minutes for our largest node today. And then if you want to remove another node and you have capacity available on the original or the other 4 in the cluster, you can remove another node out of the cluster and move that to a different data center. Again, it takes 43 minutes. You can unrack it, move it to another data center, add it into a cluster, or acquire another 2 nodes and make a new cluster with that. So think of that long term. If you had these automated generational storage upgrades where every couple years you could put in the newest nodes and move the oldest nodes out to dev DR or just lifecycle them without ever migrating data, now that's automation. That's the next generation data center. Is we have automated that whole process in the background, so you should never have to migrate data again from one generation of controller to another generation of controller. You simply add the newest nodes in, remove the older nodes, or keep them in the cluster if you want, and you should never have to migrate data again. In order to do this, we don't use RAID. RAID isn't good enough for Flash and for the next generation data center. So we use something called SolidFire Helix, which essentially means that we distribute data in duplicate across the cluster in 4K blocks. We have no single points of failure. This allows us to self-heal. In fact, today, because of how we distribute data, all drives participate in rebuilds. So if you have a cluster of 5 nodes as shown in this slide, you have 50 drives, one of them fails. 49 other drives will be participating in the rebuild. So it's a mini-to-mini rebuild, unlike traditional RAID-based solutions where they're doing parity calculations in the storage processors and then they're dumping the data back down onto a single hot spare, and it takes hours. Our rebuilds take usually about 8 minutes, 5 minutes to just make sure the drive has actually failed, and 3 minutes to recover. A full node failure gets rebuilt in about 43 minutes today, like we talked about before. So for our largest node, it's under an hour. And as you see, you have capacity available still on the cluster, which means that you can self-heal again, and you can take another node failure of 10 drives, and they can die not simultaneously, but that node can go down, and you can self-heal again in 43 minutes. So you can really be as redundant as you want to be and continue to self-heal. If you want to be N+3 or N+4, you could simply plan that in your cluster strategy, and you could always maintain that level of redundancy. We also say that we can maintain the QoS minimum setting regarding the state or failure condition of the cluster. So we can also make sure that we don't impact performance during these failures if you set up QoS appropriately. Non-disruptive hardware and software upgrades, we get faster as we scale out, so the more drives you add into the cluster, we just continue to get faster and faster and faster in how we rebuild, really reducing that risk profile significantly from, traditional storage, where usually if you have a storage processor failure, you wait 4 hours to get a part on site, and then you install it, and then you do some kind of rebalancing in the background. So your risk profile is 4+ hours. With SolidFire, if a drive dies, it's under 10 minutes. If a whole node dies, it's under an hour. And then automated generational upgrades are really enabled by this data protection strategy and how we distribute data, in that we can do all of that in the background, even as you add different node types into your infrastructure. So this is an example of a customer with 2 data centers, and they want to take one of their 4805 nodes and move it to another data center. And so they simply do that. They dismiss it from one cluster, move it to the other, and add capacity into cluster number 2. And you can even do things as crazy as moving half of a cluster from one data center to another. And this is really big in service providers where they have workloads or customers that go away or move from one site to another. And so they need to move their investments from one location to another location. And so they simply dismiss those nodes one at a time from the active cluster, move them to the other data center, and add them into that cluster. And again, it takes about 43 minutes per node, and you can ship these nodes in a regular server box. They weigh about 44 pounds from one site to another site. There's no professional services, there's no recertification, there's no complexity involved with this. So another key to an all-flash data center and next generation data center is things like no professional services. The array should be intelligent enough to do these things on its own. I had one customer a couple weeks ago tell us, after moving their whole cluster from one rack to another rack and doing it online non-disruptively because of this architecture, they responded and said that it was fun. So I think that's another key to the next generation storage, is it should be fun. It should be an architecture that allows you to do things that traditional storage would never let you do. So another key, like we talked about, to SolidFire and having all-flash storage in the data center at large scale is quality of service. Well, so with SolidFire, all you do to provision storage is give it a volume name, give it an account, a size, and then you give it a performance policy or quality of service policy, which is, today, most other vendors in the market focus only on a maximum when it comes to quality of service. But what is that maximum actually getting their customers? Really, it's protecting the storage device from itself. It doesn't actually protect the application or the volume performance. So if you provision a maximum, you're preventing the storage array from tipping over, but not really protecting the apps. If you provision a minimum and a burst in your QoS policy, you're truly protecting the application. You're saying that my database will never get less than 1,001 IOPS or 10,001 IOPS. And I want to be able to have it burst at points up to 8,000 or 18,000 or whatever it might be. So you're now saying you're giving it a minimum and a burst to allow it to, have those performance characteristics, which the minimum is very important. We'll talk about that in just a minute, which helps prevent these bully applications, or we call them noisy neighbors, where, VDI running on the same array as Oracle traditionally, and with all other storage arrays, you're going to see this big dip during a boot storm. With SolidFire, you create these swim lanes of performance where you say VMware can have a minimum of 500 IOPS, but I want my SQL to always have a minimum of 8,000. And then we make sure that it always gets a minimum of 8,000 IOPS. And so you really start to prioritize workloads over each other, which massively decreases the troubleshooting required for performance problems. When I was administering my storage array, usually by the time I figured out what the problem was, it had disappeared. The user was no longer experiencing the problem. And so most storage troubleshooting is very reactive instead of proactive. With SolidFire, you can be very proactive. In fact, you can do things like, this is an example of a database volume where they accidentally left the minimum at 100 IOPS, and they're running a VDI environment on the same cluster. A boot storm happens, and you see the database bandwidth and I/O tanks during that boot storm. This is pretty much what you would get on most other flash arrays that do not have a minimum, which is really none of them. So with SolidFire, you can come in instantaneously and you can change that minimum to 15,000 IOPS, and you can click save, and instantaneously you've given it another 14,500 IOPS. So the next day the same boot storm happens, and now that you've prioritized the database over VDI, you'll see that the performance is linear, even though they're running on the same exact cluster together. So you can really isolate performance now as a tenant as well as security on top of SolidFire. Some other really neat things that we do are really trending and analysis of capacity and performance. So with traditional arrays, you see that you usually can trend off of capacity. You know generally that your capacity growth year over year is 20, 30, 40%, but it's hard to trend against performance growth. You essentially see this, you're giving everything, all the I/O capability of the array or whatever drives disks that the application is running on. With SolidFire, you not only see your storage capacity and growth over time, you see your provisioned I/O capacity. So 100% of a cluster, in this case a 4-node cluster is 200,000 IOPS. You see that you're provisioning about 30-some% of your 200,000 IOPS as minimum. You're provisioning 50-some% as maximum, and about 120% as your burst capacity. So in this case, you see that you're okay with your provisioned I/O, and you could add a large capacity node into your cluster. But if you saw that you were provisioning at 50 or 60% for your minimum, you might want to look at adding in a performance node. So now very easily, this is the main dashboard, the main user interface of SolidFire. You can log in and immediately see what type of resources you are using in the environment. That helps you to forecast what you might need in the future. And then we also have, through our monitoring interface, we give you a capacity forecast that shows, based on your historical consumption, when we think that you might run out of capacity on your cluster. And again, this is an all-inclusive model, so all of these things that we're showing today are included with the cost of the nodes. We talk about automation, and automation is really the future of Flash and the next-gen data center. SolidFire is, like I mentioned, a software-defined storage array that is 100% native REST-based open APIs. So you can script through PowerShell or any other language that you want to the SolidFire array. In fact, the first couple of generations of SolidFire didn't even have a user interface, but now it's a nice, clean one. And we're deeply integrated with OpenStack, CloudStack, VMware, Platform 9, and many other provisioning portal tools or other tools that help you to automate in your environment. And automation really helps to reduce risk in the environment and increase speed and agility. And even throughout the user interface, we show you every time we make an action, we can show you the full API call for that action. So we can help you to start scripting if it's not something that's really familiar to you today. Talking about reduction of complexity when it comes to troubleshooting or even initial configuration and operation, this is kind of the things that I dealt with before. Is if an application business unit came to me and said we need X amount of I/O, I would figure out the number of drives that we would need, the size, the speed of those drives, how we would set up the storage on top of the disks, how we would provision them out to the hosts. You take all of those things into account with traditional storage. With SolidFire, you really focus on the initial size, capacity, or I/O, and create accounts for them to access the SolidFire volumes and how you scale over time. But that's really about it that you have to do with SolidFire. You focus a lot more on provisioning and operating and maintaining performance than all of the things that you traditionally had to worry about with other types of storage devices. OpenStack is also a very large use case for SolidFire. Two of our internal engineers were on the original platform program leads for the Cinder driver for OpenStack. So if you are looking for a block storage for OpenStack, think of SolidFire. We can do some really neat things very easily with OpenStack, and there's a couple things that you can do with SolidFire pretty easily that are not easy, or you can't do it all with other storage vendors when it comes to block storage. So if you're looking at OpenStack, definitely think of SolidFire. Inline data reduction is absolutely a key to the future of an all-flash data center because always-on inline dedupe and compression allow you to pay for the storage that you're actually consuming and not overbuying storage to try to plan for unpredictable workloads. But it also helps to increase performance per RU in the data center, way fewer cables, reduce power and cooling costs, reduce rack space. There's a lot of physical data center benefits, but also a lot of benefits to the applications. Like we talked about, Flash fixes a lot of problems in the data center, and with even a small amount of efficiency now, Flash is really cheaper than spinning disks. So as Flash continues to grow year over year, doubling, tripling more in capacity, and the prices are dropping, we're going to see a lot more Flash in the data center. But the most important thing to know is that with any array that does deduplication and compression, the data that you put on the array determines your efficiency. But at large scale, SolidFire's efficiencies are always going to shine over other people because we can scale much larger than them. When you think of most of the other vendors out there today, you can scale to 4 shelves of 25 drives or 8 shelves of 25 drives, and then you have to start over. You buy a brand new cluster, and then you can scale that cluster up to 4 or 8 shelves of drives. But each of those is a silo of efficiency. You have 2 different clusters that both are doing dedupe and compression, and you're not getting the benefit of them running together for global dedupe and compression. With SolidFire, because we can grow from 4 nodes to 100 nodes, you can have all of those running in the same cluster and get the benefit of efficiencies at scale. Again, another key thing to the next generation data center is all-inclusive feature sets. And when I started, I was really surprised by the first couple here in the list, the synchronous and asynchronous replication, and it actually works and it's very good. Snapshots and clones, integrated native cloud backup abilities to anything that talks Amazon or S3 or Swift protocols. 256-bit data at rest encryption is included, no additional licensing fees for that. Comprehensive logging through SNMP or syslog. Also 5-year ActiveIQ cloud-based monitoring. So we collect the data off of your array, and then we present it to you through our cloud tool called ActiveIQ, and it shows you all of your efficiencies and your consumption over time. And even one of those screens before where I showed the capacity forecasting, that's included as part of ActiveIQ, where it shows you how much capacity you're using over time. Secure multi-tenancy is an absolute key to SolidFire today. In iSCSI, we can have up to 256 different VLANs talking to SolidFire to different volumes. Multi-protocol support, and again, deep integration with VMware, OpenStack, CloudStack. There's some things we can do with VMware that are really cool around VAI and BASA providers. We also, like I mentioned, for data protection, we have many different strategies. We can do backup recovery to native cloud tools. We can do synchronous and asynchronous replication, snapshots that are VSS consistent, integration with traditional backup tools as well. And for replication today, we can replicate to 5 different clusters, and you can do any type of replication that you want. So synchronous, asynchronous, snapshots. And a really neat thing about this is that it's after decompression. So if you're reducing the data 60%, you only send the metadata for the rest of that 40% across the wire. So it's very efficient in how it replicates as well. And again, to 5 different clusters today. So this is a picture of the family again. Again, you start with 4 nodes of any particular type, and you can grow up from there. Our support is, we call it active support for a reason. It's a very proactive support model. 24/7 direct Tier 3 support for every customer, inclusive of this active IQ performance, and cloud-based monitoring for your cluster, and including things like software upgrades. So we even do the software upgrades for you. You simply would open a ticket with SolidFire support to upgrade your cluster, and you would tell them when you want them to do it during your change window, and they will log in with your approval and upgrade your cluster completely non-disruptively. Once again, highlighting how Gartner, independent validation that SolidFire really has the critical capabilities needed for deploying all flash in the data center. So I encourage you to take a look at this Gartner critical capability study, and highlights, a lot of the things that SolidFire does for enterprises. And even though you may have only heard about us recently, again, we've been out there for a very long time, focused on service providers and powering some of the most demanding, biggest data centers around the globe, and even large enterprises like Ultimate Software running somewhere around 180 nodes today in many different data centers. So we're powering some of the biggest companies out there that are running SolidFire on as part of their next generation data center, because they can do flash at large scale. So even though you've only heard of us recently, we've been out there for quite a while. And the enterprise data centers is changing. IT applications are changing, and they have different needs. They have needs for scale out, for high performance, for automation, for data assurance, and certainly we all want to take advantage of global efficiency. So sometimes you need a different foundation for this next generation of data center, and we think SolidFire is absolutely that enabler, that foundation for the next generation data center. So thank you all for attending today, and again, I appreciate North American Systems for sponsoring this webinar with us. And with that, we'll open up to any questions that you have. It looks like we have a couple in chat. So the pricing question, please, Stephen, ask that to your North American representative. Trying to keep this mostly technical today. With Mike's question, when running 100 nodes, do you still only have 2 controller nodes, or there are recommendations to add controllers as the cluster grows? So in a scale-out model, think of every node as a controller. So if you have 10 nodes, you have 10 controllers. If you have 20 nodes, you have 20 controllers. Every node is a controller, and it adds to the performance of the system as a whole. And volumes are spread across all of the drives in a cluster. So we balance the volumes across the nodes for primary communication, but the actual volume in the back end will be spread across as many drives as we can spread it across. So really think of this as a totally different model than scale-up storage, where you have 2 controllers and then that's it, or a different scale-out model where you might start with 1 and then go to 2 and then grow to 8 and then have to start over. With SolidFire's flexible scale-out model, every node is a controller, and that goes from 4 all the way up to 100. Well, fantastic. If there's, from Jeff, we have another question. Why do you need to start with a group of 4 nodes? So the simplest answer is that we have a quorum to prevent a split brain, so we need at least 3 nodes to be a part of that quorum. And then if you notice throughout the presentation today, our redundancy is capacity-based to a degree. And so we always like to have 1 node for failover. You notice that we don't do hot spares, we don't do parity drives, we don't do a lot of the other things that traditional storage does. We simply, ask for capacity for failure. So if you always wanted to be n+2, you would have enough capacity to fail 2 nodes at any given time. But we like to start people off at n+1, so we have our 3 nodes for our quorum and then another node for redundancy. And then do you need to add them in groups of 4? No, you can add them in single nodes. If it's the same node type, you can just add 1 node at a time, 10 drives, and this is really important in VDI environments where you want to scale the cost of VDI with the amount of users that you're growing. So if you think of other Flash solutions, sometimes you have to add 50 drives at a time. Well, if you only need to add 100 VDI users, you don't want to add 50 drives to support those 100 VDI users. So with SolidFire, you can scale 10 drives at a time, 1 node at a time, and go from there. And if you want to have a deeper discussion on that, I absolutely would love to have a chat offline about how the many different ways that we can scale. Mike's question, at some point 10 gig iSCSI links will get saturated on diskless controller nodes. So today each node has 2 10 gig ports, and out of that we only use about 60% of that bandwidth, even when we are doing a rebalance on our nodes. So even with 10 gig, when they're bonded together with something like LACP, we're still only using about 60% of that bandwidth to do a rebuild. Any stats on read latency? So SolidFire is an all-flash array, so we can absolutely have sub-millisecond, half-second latencies. And the neat thing is if you want to talk to your North American representative to set up a demo, we can show you how when you set up QoS, we can actually change the characteristics of QoS. And by bringing that minimum up from 100 IOPS to 1,000 IOPS to 10,000 IOPS, you can see the latency drop on the database volume. So we can definitely control the response time by increasing that minimum. That's why the minimums are so important. And really no other vendor out there is focusing on minimums, but by increasing that minimum, you prioritize that workload over all other workloads on the array, which hence drops the latency down. And Mike's question, assuming the host must go through the diskless controller nodes to get to backend storage, there actually are, in a standard cluster, there are no controllers that don't have drives in them. Again, every single node is a controller, and all of them have 10 SSDs in them. And so we manage the communication through the master, the cluster master, but then all volume communication is spread across the entire cluster. So if you have 50 volumes, and 10 nodes, those are all going to be spread across the whole cluster in talking through a virtual IP on the back end. Yeah, the diskless nodes are only if you want to add fiber channel in. And I really love this deployment model, specifically because of where I came from. There were a number of Sev 1 outages, and all of them were related to fiber channel. So the way SolidFire does it is when you want fiber channel, we add in 2 fiber channel nodes that do not have drives in them. They only have fiber channel and 10 gig ports on the back end, and they handle all fiber channel communication. Those 2 nodes can scale up independently of the storage. So you can grow your storage in the back end, you zone your fiber channel ports one time, and you start with storage nodes behind those. You can start at 4, and you can grow those up today. And then when you need to scale fiber channel, you scale fiber channel in the future. So you can kind of scale them independently instead of other models where every time you add in a pair of heads or controllers, you add in fiber channel ports, even though you don't need them. So most other all-flash arrays cannot saturate those links, and so they're adding in a bunch of 8 gig ports that they could never saturate. So SolidFire's model is, I think, very clean in how you grow fiber channel and really reducing your risk exposure over time as you make changes to the environment on the back end. Excellent. Well, I think we are just about out of time. We're actually over. So thank you all again for attending. And if you have any questions or would like a deeper dive in a demo, please reach out to your North American team, and they will get that set up. Thank you again for attending today.